everyone. Welcome to our newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, Bernhard Gunther, and myself, Laura Matsu. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about how we can use our healing to help others. But before we get into it, we do have a lot of new listeners to the podcast. We just want to give a brief introduction to who we are. So I'll start with myself. My name is Laura Matsu, and I'm basically a psycho-spiritual coach is what I've named myself. And I like to weave together Western psychology, especially depth psychology like Carl Jung, and Eastern spirituality. So, you know, Bernhard and I work together in the Embodied Soul Awakening 12-week group coaching program, where we basically bring in all these different modalities that we've studied, myself coming from the more somatic psychology modalities, you know, Tibetan Buddhism, evolutionary astrology, and really weave together, you know, deep psychology with spiritual work. And the reason that why we do that is because as journeyers on the path, as many of you, we've noticed that the way to kind of eliminate the potential for spiritual bypassing is we actually have to understand our psyche. We actually have to understand our psychology. Otherwise, we can just be using spiritual techniques to just kind of feel better or just, you know, ascend with quotation marks around it, but we're never really getting anywhere with our life. So our intention with this podcast is to give you practical tools that you can use so that you can really, you know, become who you truly are, discover your true self, and really discover your true nature. So it is a psycho-spiritually based podcast, essentially. And we also talk about this in light of current events. And Bernhard also brings his own unique perspective. So you can talk a little bit about yourself to people who are new.
Yes. Okay, let me introduce myself. For our new listeners, my name is Bernhard Gunther. I'm Laura's husband, originally from Germany. I guess my accent gives it away, but I've been living in the US for almost 30 years now. My background is I came to the US studying drums and percussion. So I have a background in, you know, making music, especially percussion, playing drums. That helped me a lot in my own inner process, so to speak, expressing myself creatively. And then I also got deep into somatic work. I've been a professional body worker for the past 15 years, studying various different massage, bodywork modalities, healing modalities that helped me also in my own healing process. And I've been working on over thousands of people, applying these modalities very successfully. Also, I'm a longtime student of yoga, Qigong, which I also teach. I have also background in 5-rhythm dance and various shamanic practices. But the bulk of my work is really on my website, veilofreality.com. I've been a researcher and explorer into various topics, that are coming more to the front, so to speak, in this day and age. And I've been writing, many essays and articles on my website regarding to spirituality, shamanism, psychology, deeper self-work, esotericism, as well as the occult and hyperdimensional realities and what many people call conspiracy, quote, theories, which are not that much theory anymore. A lot of what's happening today I've been writing and talking about for literally over 2 decades, and more people thankfully become aware of it. So if you want to hear more about it or read more about it, just go to my website, veilofreality.com. And really the foundation of what we're doing, as Laura just mentioned, also with the Cosmic Matrix podcast and our online courses and whatnot, is combining this necessary, quote, inner and outer work. The inner work of really like deeper psychological, psycho-spiritual work based on the fourfold approach of holistic self-work on all levels. The fourfold approach, meaning physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, in context of the outer work, understanding the cosmic forces, the matrix forces, what's happening in the world, but also from a bigger picture perspective in light of the evolution of consciousness.
And just a quick reminder, we have a handful of spots left for our next round of Embodied Soul Awakening, which will start on April 11th. So by the time we release this podcast, it will start in a few days. So if you want to join us, you can either go to Bernhard's website at veilofreality.com and look under courses, or you can go directly to the application at awakenapply.com. So in this podcast, we are going to talk about why we need to heal to help others, what it means to be of service to others, and how evidently through being of service to others, we're going to deal with all sorts of projections, transference, countertransference, which is basically a therapeutic term for overlaying what's going on, our unresolved experiences onto current experiences, essentially. We're also going to talk about karma really in depth from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, the path of the wounded healer, and how it relates to this new moon in Aries we just experienced, and what that was all about, and how that's kind of setting the stage for this next cycle. And at the end, we're going to really talk about that transit in depth and what could have come up for us, how it relates to core wounds, early childhood stuff, etc. And on the second hour, which is only for members, we're going to go into all the Chiron placements in depth and just talk about them one by one. And then you can kind of see, based on your own astrology chart, where your lesson in healing is potentially for this new astrological year. So, yeah, let's just get right into it. So first of all, the reason why we're really focusing on how to use our healing to help others is because I think that we've all experienced, and maybe we're still experiencing, this massive trauma of the past couple years. And we're all trying to recover from it, I imagine, in different ways, whether we lost our job, or whether you lost your job, or whether you lost connections with family members, or whether you maybe even lost connection with yourself because the stress was just so overwhelming that you didn't have a time to catch yourself and breathe. So we're at the beginning of this new astrological year. It's very interesting how it was conjunct with Chiron, this new moon in Aries, which just passed. So I think the real focus for this next astrological cycle should have some amount of almost healing some of our wounds that we've gained over the past years, maybe our whole life.
Yeah, and really the basis of this episode podcast about how to use our healing to help others goes aligned with the saying, as cliche as it is, but it's true. The more we heal ourselves, we help to heal the world, or we heal ourselves and automatically heal the world, because also based on a universal law, an absolute law, hermetic law, non-man-made law that is just absolute and affects everyone, as above, so below, or as within, so without. So likely, even we have talked a lot about on our podcast about shadow work, right? How we tend to project our shadow externally, or whatever we haven't really healed within ourselves, we experience as fate externally, as Carl Jung said. But in the same token, the more we heal ourselves deeply within ourselves, it has ripple effects into the world, into reality, because everything is one, everything is connected, since we're living under the illusion of separation. So that's why we're also so big on this inner work, or the great work as it's called. So the more we connect from our inner essence, our true self being, our divine being, and work through the layers, our own wounds and traumas, the more of a positive effect we have on the outer world, and can really truly be of service and help others.
So a bodhisattva basically is someone who's dedicated to the spiritual path, but they're not doing it just for them anymore. And the reason they're not doing it just for them anymore is they've experienced what they call bodhicitta, an awakened heart. And this awakened heart genuinely feels the suffering of the world as if it's their own suffering. And that makes them naturally want to help others. So it's a natural response. And it actually comes as a result of your own spiritual practice and working on yourself. So it's a path basically that you can take. You can also not take this path. I'm just talking about this as one perspective, because if we're talking about being of service to others, it's about using our own awakening, I guess you could say, to also help others and wake other people up, and not our ego strategies on awakening, or the ego personality, the spiritually enlightened ego personality. I'm talking about an open heart that truly feels the suffering of the world as if it's our own. And it's actually this really encompasses, it's really best described rather in this quote by Pema Chodron, where she talks about bodhicitta, compassion, and the bodhisattva. So I'm going to read it. And she says, bodhicitta, which is the awakened heart, is also equated in part with compassion, our ability to feel the pain that we share with others. Without realizing it, we continually shield ourselves from this pain because it scares us. We put up protective walls made of opinions, prejudices, strategies, barriers that are built on the deep fear of being hurt. These walls are further fortified by all kinds of emotions: anger, craving, indifference, jealousy, envy, arrogance, pride. But fortunately for us, the soft spot, our innate ability ability to love and to care about things is like a crack in these walls we erect. It's a natural opening in the barriers we create when we're afraid. With practice, we can learn to find this opening. We can learn to seize that vulnerable moment. Love, gratitude, loneliness, embarrassment, inadequacy can all awaken bodhicitta. An analogy for bodhicitta is the rawness of a broken heart. Sometimes this broken heart gives birth to anxiety and panic, and sometimes to anger, resentment, and blame. But underneath the hardness of that armor, there is a tenderness of genuine sadness. This is our link with all those we have ever loved. This genuine heart of sadness can teach us great compassion. It can humble us when we're arrogant and soften us when we are unkind. It awakens us when we prefer to sleep and pierce through our indifference. This continual ache of the heart is a blessing when accepted fully and can be shared by all. And then essentially she goes on to say that this awakened heart is available to us anywhere, anytime, but it's affected by the clouds of our own perceptions, our own emotions, our own experience, basically. So we have it available to us, but it's kind of our fixed thoughts and the perceptions and the thoughts that we grasp onto and the stories we make up that actually gets in the way. And that's actually, personally, I notice how it feels if you do your own healing work, is you literally walk around in the world with a broken heart, because you will see the immense suffering in the world. It will become even more clear to you. You'll see people in their delusion and their defense mechanisms and their coping mechanisms, and you'll feel that in your heart as if it's your own, So I think it's important, for a lot of us, we think, oh, healing is just more love and more heart opening and blah, blah, blah. No, but it's actually, you actually become more sensitive to the suffering of the world, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. I mean, that ties into many other topics. I think we need to explore also the prerequisites for helping others, so to speak, because what does it mean to help others? As you mentioned, the ego can easily interfere in this process. And as you were reading the quote about the rollout of bodhisattva, also in light of soul evolution, so to speak, that true bodhisattva is a individualized embodied soul being on a higher level.
Yes.
of being in its evolution of consciousness.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
It's nothing you just decide to become.
No,
mentioned, it's a natural process. Then through the heart opening, through the layers, you become more connected to essence. You more truly feel connected to all the living beings, and then really see reality as it is, and then naturally gravitate towards helping and healing others as well, correct?
Yeah, and it's also highly related to being able to still the mind and develop that deeper awareness so that you're able to disidentify with your own personal I, your own ego strategies, and more tune into the emptiness of the entire world, So it's like the entire world becomes your problem, I guess you could say, because you've gotten that personal I more out of the way. That's the whole point. And so I see a lot of people actually, they're very almost overly, and it's not that your ego, your ego plays a part, it plays a role, but it's about disidentifying with all the strategies you use to almost like armor yourself up, basically, So if I'm like, oh, I'm more concerned about myself, I'm out for myself, I need to protect myself or whatever, then you're naturally not going to be open to the world, So it comes as and then actually, technically, according to, the stages of Buddhism, the Hinayana, which is about stilling the mind and developing that deeper awareness, needs to come first. So if we're in chaos and craziness ourselves, we're just going to transfer more confusion onto others, So we want to almost be more empty so that we can be open to the other person's experience without kind of layering our shit on top of it, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And we all tend to do that sometimes, but I've noticed whenever majority of my suffering comes when I'm trying to grasp onto some sense of myself, and then I abandon the other connections and relationships that are going on.
Yeah, that reminds me also what, again, Sri Aurobindo talked about from his perspective of integral yoga, and I'm paraphrasing, the seeker, the sadak, as he becomes more aligned with his essence, divine will, and the psychic being opens up and takes charge. He opens himself up more to the world, and then it's not only with dealing with his own suffering, but with the suffering of the world, literally feel the weight of the world on its shoulders because of the other forces interacting and weighing down on the collective.
Yeah.
So naturally, you have to have like an embodied, stronger sense of self to deal with that,
yes,
right, so to speak. So that's the idea of that's the idea of service to others, which I also want to talk about, the idea of STO, service to others and helping others, is such a noble thing. But people don't really understand what it really entails and the traps and distortions of helping others for the reasons you just mentioned, because the ego can easily hijack it as well, right?
Yeah.
But before I want to get into that, I want to also talk about, ultimately the role of the bodhisattva also reminds me, when mention that, because I've written an article about this over 10 years ago, into more like, let's say contemporary New Age spiritual concepts like the wanderer, from the raw material of highly developed souls coming back into this density to help others during this transition, or the family of light from Barbara Siniak's teachings and whatnot, or the concept of the light worker, all of that, which has been, I have to say, become very distorted and diluted in the New Age arena. And if people haven't read my article yet, I recommend to read it. I wrote it actually 10 years ago, called Wanderer's Purpose and Esoteric Work in This Time of Transition. You can find it on my website, veilofreality.com, where I talk about how the ego easily can hijack these concepts we identify as a healer, as a helper, as a light worker, as a starseed or something, right? And with this grand mission of helping others. But it requires, as Lord just mentioned, certain inner alignment and state of being where you truly have the ego in check, so to speak.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I was to become to truly help another person. It is also deeply related, which you will talk about later, about the story of Chiron, right? The wounded healer, the archetype of the wounded healer.
Yes.
And that's really what it comes down to, which is really the topic of this episode as well. How the more you heal yourself as the wounded healer, the more you can help others.
Yes, and this wounded healer archetype really came to the forefront because the new moon in Aries was conjunct Chiron, which is the asteroid of that wounded healer. So the role that Chiron plays is actually through our original wounding and through healing that wound, we become a great teacher for others in that area. And I've actually noticed more and more how much Chiron does play more of a role in the chart than I think it's being given credit for. So basically with this new moon in Aries, it could have triggered one of our core wounds. Chiron really represents the most tender and vulnerable part of ourselves, the part of ourselves that gets most easily triggered. And when we do get triggered, it can bring up all sorts of beliefs about the self. So it basically represents where we were the most wounded, but upon healing that aspect of ourselves, we become the most effective or teacher healer in this area. So it's about where we may feel scapegoated or handicapped or victimized in some way. And then this core wound becomes the main initiation that sets us on the hero's journey of healing. So basically with this new moon in Aries conjunct Chiron, it was about the wound to the self, meaning like not being able to stand up for yourself, not being able to express your instinctual will. It could be related to potential early childhood experiences with the moon, wounds to the mother, wounds around the emotions, the feminine. So Chiron in Aries is basically bringing to forefront a wound to the identity, not feeling like you matter, not feeling like your needs are important. Sometimes maybe even dismissing your needs to the point where you don't even know what your needs are because you sacrifice them to others, basically. So this can manifest in two forms: as an overcompensating attitude, like narcissistic grandiosity, like I'm the best, only I matter, like this really self-focused without considering others. And it can manifest also as self-diminishment. So like I'm nothing, my needs aren't important, no one cares about me. So Chiron is in Aries essentially a wound to our yang energy. And if you suppress that life force, it will bubble under the surface and just stay there. And it will explode when someone touches that core wound, and you'll explode usually with anger or rage. So, there's a really high price to pay for holding your life force hostage. And the price that you pay is you end up living in a life that's basically not in alignment with what you want, with who you truly are. You suppress your spontaneity, your instincts, your vitality, your fire. So when you don't have a healthy sense of who you are instead cast out into like this ocean of life without a self to center yourself in. So you basically become at the mercy of everyone's experience at the cost of your own, basically. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you can relate because your Chiron is in Aries.
Exactly. I have natally Chiron in Aries. And as a matter of fact, obviously, then for anybody who knows astrology, I'm in the middle of my Chiron return, which takes a few years around the age of 50. And interesting you mentioned, I didn't even know that what you said yesterday, a few days ago, Chiron was conjuncting the moon in Aries.
New moon in Aries,
New moon in Aries. And,
yeah.
As you know, some stuff came up also in my own got re-triggered some childhood wounds. Very interesting. And I feel that's what my Chiron return is about, to really like bring back everything that I haven't really fully healed yet, in terms of the archetypal themes you just mentioned of Chiron in Aries, right?
Yeah.
The wound to the self.
Yes.
And that what you described is really describes my upbringing or my journey as a very insecure boy, very extremely shy and being bullied and all of that, and losing myself, comparing myself. And it's interesting in that sense, in light of what you just shared, also in light of the wounded healer, I see my path also helping, helping to empower others, because I needed to empower myself, right? And first, it's a twofold journey to build a healthy sense of self, a healthy ego without spiritual bypassing. And then the next stage, even going beyond the ego, right? Transcending it and anchoring the divine and bringing the psychic being or the soul to the front. But I can really see this journey of the wounded healer, in that aspect in light of Chiron and Aries in my own life and how it relates to the work I'm doing. Because one of the main questions people always ask, how did you get into this work? How did you get into this work? Why you start all this writing and all of that? And I always answer, because I suffer, and the suffering is really written down in my chart with Chiron and Aries and other aspects. So that's where it's really coming from. On that note, I really want to share this real quick for people who are new to astrology. And I was thinking about this morning as well, as I was contemplating really the power of astrology. And I'm specifically talking about evolutionary astrology, because we have talked about, or Laura specifically in other podcasts, how astrology has also become hijacked by the woke cult or new age, distorted. And people can abuse astrology, use it as spiritual bypassing, or just get hooked on transits and waiting for something to happen. But if you really apply evolutionary astrology, especially the outer planets or asteroids, as Laura just mentioned, in conjunction with the work of deep psycho-spiritual work, psychological and spiritual work, it has tremendous impact, right? Because that kind of astrological insight helps you to give a more objective view, and then helps you to really specifically use the work to work on these areas. And that has helped me tremendously in my process. And that's also something we'll go deeper in our courses as well. I just wanted to note that on the side note, because it's astrology helps really to give you these deeper insights into your psyche, basically.
Exactly. It shows you kind of your archetypal template, and there's a lot of room to play with that. It's not definitive at all. And it's also, the astrology, it's a psychic art as well. So it's a psychic intuitive art, and it's also takes some amount of logic and rationality, because you have to be able to read the chart, basically, which is very mathematical. So, we want to consider that. And I want to just continue actually with Chiron and talking about, because it goes through actually several phases as well. So, first it starts out with this core wound that we get set on this hero's journey to heal. And then we become a teacher or mentor for others in that area that we were first wounded, So the wound that we most struggle with, we become the best healer or teacher for others in that arena. But then we go through another cycle with it. And then we have to actually watch ourselves and become a teacher, that we don't become, like overly inflated or messiah, be like, oh, I'm the best healer or whatever. And then we become the one who wounds. So that's a really important part that people miss with Chiron, basically. And Melanie Reinhardt, actually, in her book with Chiron, really talks about this very well. And she says, Chiron describes the nature of a person's contribution to life, the positive or negative, when it symbolizes that for which he or she will be remembered, heroicized, famed, immortalized, or indeed condemned. So it is almost this place in our chart where we may experience infamy, for better or worse, basically. However, from a psychological point of view, what we produce, do, or create can always be validated, admired, or denigrated by others, but the subjective and therefore enduring experience of the spiritual journey is found within our own inner depths. And then she says where basically areas of the psyche that connect to Chiron may be very vulnerable. Just as Chiron shows where we may already be wounded, so it may also show where we either fear or actually experience similar situations. So she's talking about the process of projection that can happen with it as well. This shows us in an area where the soul that still seeks healing and brings to mind the sword which heals the wound it inflicted, whereby what we dread and fear may be the very thing through which healing comes, basically. So a lot of Chiron transits can be, in essence, very painful and be exactly the thing we didn't want to happen, but was exactly the medicine that we needed. So that's actually what could have been coming up for people. And so she said, continues, where Chiron is involved, as we have seen above, there's a group of three figures: the healer, the wounded one, and the one who wounds. In a given individual life, one of these will usually be more obvious than the other two, or part of the shadow. Often the healer figure is more developed. This figure, of course, does not only represent someone literally works in this professions, but generally the way that someone is of service to others. So Chiron is where we go through a healing journey, basically. This is my words, by the way. I stopped the quote. A rebirth that often first involves feeling scapegoated, alienated, having some sort of loss or wound, even being victimized or sick. And this healing journey is an initiation in where we can be best of service to others. So we become that medicine that other people need through healing ourselves. And this helps us recover our uniqueness, and we make a real contribution of the world in this area, and we feel a sense of purpose. So we may also become a teacher for others in this area, but keep it in check, because continuously we have to keep working on this Chiron so we don't fall into power trips, self-inflation, because if we do, we become the one who wounds. So this is like more these spiritual teachers who get these messiah complexes and then become egomaniacal. Like that's the negative Chiron, basically. So we take several heroes journey with this Chiron to resolve this kind of repetition. So again, we use this core wound to expand our consciousness. And it's almost like these layers of the onion, so each layer that we pull off and each level of healing that we pull off, the closer we get to the true I, so our true nature. And this is really about merging heaven and earth, basically merging the human experience with the divine. Chiron is half centaur and half man, basically. So we want to think about like kind of merging these two natures, this like animal nature and the human nature and the divine nature as well. So it's important that we actually, I think in my view, Chiron is actually teaching us how to get into a better relationship with our suffering and how to use that suffering for medicine for others, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very well said. So, Chiron is a deep clue, the archetype of the wounded healer. Very important to understand, especially in light of really wanting to helping others. And, when we talk about the prerequisites for helping others, it means also that you are sincerely engaged in your own healing process. Because there are many quote unquote traps, on this path towards awakening. I've mentioned this as many times before as well, which you're not aware of. The ego can easily hijack the process. The ego can also hijack the process or the idea of helping others, right? So we need to be really aware of, because many aspects come into it. Also, one of the aspects, like as Laura just shared with Chiron, that we can even damage or hurt somebody, we can also interfere with somebody's soul lesson, so to speak.
Yes.
So there needs to be, even I wrote about this, or even gave a talk about this, the various traps on the path towards awakening. One of the traps is the trap of wanting to help others. And again, that sounds very counterintuitive, because of course you want to help others. But what is it based on? Sometimes we help others in order to make ourselves feel better. So we have our own agenda, of how the help looks like, and we are not really considerate of the other person. Yeah. That's number one. Also, to truly help another person, as any healer, true coach, everybody knows, the other person needs to sincerely request and ask for it. on a very basic level, you cannot help people who are not willing to help themselves.
Yeah.
And then if you base that on our own wounding, which I can relate to, I fell into traps of like savior victim dynamics, right? Attracting, especially my relationships, my past relationships, attracting chronic victims, and I played the savior role. Oh, I need to save this person, save this Amazon in distress. But it was coming from my own wounding, my own childhood wounding, relating to my parental upbringing and all of that. Almost trying to replay a certain childhood scenario of trying to save another person.
Yeah.
In order, almost just to make myself feel better, and also the ego hijacked the idea.
So it's about
as well.
you. It's not about actually helping them.
It was exactly about me.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was lying to myself about that. So, and I see this a lot out there,
Yeah.
So we need to be very, very honest ourselves where this intention of helping others comes from.
Yeah, and I can just say that so if you feel the need to emotionally manage others, most likely you actually had to emotionally manage your family. You were
Yes.
the person who either fulfilled your parents' needs or you try and kept the family happy or whatever. So that develops as a coping mechanism, where we had to do that for survival, basically, And actually what you said brings to mind this quote by Jordan Peterson, where he says, "Do not try to rescue someone who does not want to be rescued,
Yes.
and be very careful about rescuing someone who does." And that's so true though, because it is about karma. You actually, we can help others, we can give them a hand, but we can't walk their path for them. We can't do their healing for them. They all do that themselves, So we have to watch out for kind of even interfering in their soul's process. Like there's a beautiful aspect of struggling with a problem, of thinking it through, of really contemplating it, and really connecting with your own intuition and your own conscience on what the best course of action is, That's how your soul grows and develops awareness. But if we just go to someone for answers all the time and be like, tell me what to do, they could be doing a disservice to us, and we're doing a disservice to our own soul, So we really want to think about that.
Yeah, that reminds me of a very powerful lesson I learned in my own journey. I was about 12, 13 years ago. I took a workshop learning about deep body work, and we had a Gestalt therapy session, which is very somatic, deep work. And there was a sharing circle in person. And started with my teacher there for many years, and very powerful teacher. And that's interesting. This one woman was processing or shared her story, and she broke out crying, right? We're in this sharing circle in person. And she starts crying, really, and my teacher just holding space, letting her process, letting her talk. Then all of a sudden, this other woman comes up from across the other side of the circle, walks over, and tries to give the crying woman a tissue. And my teacher says, to the woman giving that other woman the tissue, hold on, what are you doing? Don't give her this tissue. And she felt very complex. Don't give her the tissue, please. Don't interrupt the process. She didn't ask for that. And then the other woman went back to her place. He processed with her, and then he asked the other woman, so why did you give that woman, that crying participant, the tissue? Well, she said, well, I just thought she's crying, wanted to help her out, but, careful, but she didn't ask for it. But then he started processing with her, why did you try to give her this, the tissue? And then what came out, then she started actually breaking down and realizing what you just said, Laura, that she is the caretaker in her family. She always making sure that everybody is okay, and that she has actually an issue with other people processing vulnerabilities. So the reason she actually gave the tissue was actually out of her own self-interest, because not truly to help the other person, but she unconsciously didn't feel comfortable with another person crying.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's very fascinating. So that was a very powerful lesson also, again, to not give when it says ask for. Sometimes we can interfere healing process, even if it's based on our well-meaning intention, but where is it truly coming from? And sometimes we need to let a person process, go through the emotions without rescuing, without interfering in the process, because that's what needs to happen in this very moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, we want to ask ourselves, where is it coming from, and it really is actually important that we understand ourselves, our own early childhood, as cheesy as it sounds, how that templated our attachment patterns, our sense of self, etc. How everything that was templated, at least in this lifetime, and how we relate to the world happened in the first few years of life. And I'm not saying that you can't change that. I'm just saying that that's our natural templating. So it's really important we actually understand, our own psyche. We work through some of our projections. We understand what triggers us, what gets to us. We even understand when we're triggered. The reason being is because it's an essential survival skill when working with others to be able to manage projections, transference, and countertransference. So transference is basically when you associate what's happening in the current relationship, the current experience in front of you, with the past. So for example, happens super most obviously in intimate one-on-one relationships, but it literally happens all the time. We've talked about this on in a previous podcast as well, if you want to go deeper, how to deal with projections in relationships. So it's basically when our inner experience, our psyche is overlaying a past experience onto the present person. So we're making our partner out to be our mom or our dad. And then we respond to them as if they are our mom and dad subconsciously. We respond to the projection as if it's real. And this happens all the time and people miss it all the time. And so we want to become aware, because what's most likely going to happen if you're doing deep work with people is you'll be taking to them to those early attachment experiences with their mom or dad. And if you're doing deep work with them, they will have these psychic explosions, and they're going to make you out to be what their childhood experience was. And we do this all the time in our relationships unconsciously, and it's madness basically. So we want to have some degree of like what our unhealed stuff is. So for example, if we're working with a client and a client is like, really yelling at us and making us out to be like a bad person, and they're really angry at us, and because they're angry at their mom or dad, but they're just transferring that onto us. Then if our mom was a very aggressive, angry person, then we're going to respond either emotionally or internally as if this is our mom shaming us again. And then that's the thing that we need to be aware of, so that we can actually manage our own emotions and we can actually treat them as a person in the present moment, rather than, counter transferring our own unhealed stuff onto the other person. So this is really hard to deal with. This is not like, easy stuff. Lots of therapists who work with this transference have some, they have to take years sometimes to work through some of these projections, but we at least have to be aware when it's happening and when we're triggered and what kind of core wounds tend to come up when we're triggered, so that we can manage ourselves and that we're not, Chiron becoming the one who wounds.
Yeah. So that's a very important point. What a lot of people understand when they try to help others, or people who have been in this work for a long time know about that. Once you really truly do deeper work and truly help another, they may, as Gurdjieff said, at some point work against you. And what he mean by that they're going to start projecting their own stuff, which is being uncovered onto you. All of a sudden you become the dad or the mother that abused or neglected them unconsciously, these projections. And as Laura just said, if you haven't healed your own stuff, then your own really made your own shadow conscious, so to speak, and integrated more and are aware of your own triggers, then you will most likely engage in countertransference, right? And you engage in this shadow dance, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which we see all over the place nowadays, right?
Yeah. You want to basically neither resist or encourage the projections.
Exactly. And that's so hence one of the prerequisites is really that you have your shadow work down, and like don't just react and don't identify with what everything comes up, but able to observe and respond consciously. Because even Reggie Ray, I don't know if you was quote out, talks about, the role of bodhisattva. You become really, he said it very bluntly, when you become the target of your projections, that you become their toilet, right? They're just going to piss on you, so to speak, which happens,
Well, basically what he says is that if you really dedicate your own awakening to be of service to others, you will attract people who will basically treat you like crap more and more, and who will look for a target for them to put their suffering.
That's why this whole idea of helping others, it's not a lofty like bodhisattva, I'm just going to be a light worker. No, it is intense work, because also we know it from the hidden force or occult perspective, other forces will also interfering in all of that, maybe working through the other person with Tikkun, all of that. So you really have to have a strong warrior attitude to be grounded in this work. So if you have not really are engaged in this work yourself sincerely, you will be thrown off by the storm and by other forces and the projections coming from the ones you're literally trying to help.
Yeah. And so that's why, this neutrality is not you checking out of the experience. It's not the disassociative thing. This neutrality has to come via self-knowledge, meaning it doesn't mean that your core wounds are not going to get triggered ever again. You're just going to work out your shadow. And then all of a sudden you're going to be perfectly equipped to help others. No, it means that you actually have the awareness, even maybe perhaps the ability to just kind of, witness yourself, objectively observe yourself in the moment so that you don't react from your unresolved unconscious material. Meaning that, if you can't stay neutral to someone that you're trying to help, and you feel an emotional charge, it means that their projections are likely activating one of your core wounds as well. So it becomes a shadow dance. And actually, it can be a tremendous opportunity for healing in both arenas. But as the person, who may be, especially if you're in a position of authority, you're a therapist or coach or whatever, you actually have to be able to hold your own material in that instance and not respond from an angry and triggered place, and be like, whoa, this person is getting really angry at me. And it's reminding my mom gets angry at me. And can I find ways to manage my own pain that's coming up so that I can kind of witness them objectively and actually help them, So we want to, if you get into attack and defense mode, there's a part of you that believes their projection and is responding to that projection. And that's another psychological concept called projective identification, where basically someone projects on us, makes us out to be a certain person, and then through the intensity of their projection, we can become their projection, basically. So like, for example, if someone is like really angry and treating us as if we're aggressive, but we're really calm, through them being super angry with us and, really kind of charged up, they could turn us into that angry projection, even though we weren't originally that one.
Right.
So there's all sorts of hidden dynamics that can go on, but essentially knowing how to, knowing yourself, knowing your childhood template, knowing your core wounds, knowing what triggers you, knowing when you're triggered and how to deal with that is really essential, to working with others.
So that's really key, though, going back to the prerequisite of helping others. It's not like you take a course, like, especially nowadays, I'm going to be a life coach, take this workshop certified course, or just read a couple of books here and there. No, it's really about you, quote unquote, graduate by the inner work, right? The more you have really healed yourself, made your shadow conscious, are aware of your childhood wounds, your own triggers, then the more of a powerful helping force you are, right?
So in the second hour, as we're about to close up, we're going to go into each Chiron placement one by one. If you don't know where your Chiron is, you can easily go to astro.com and enter your birth details and create a free natal chart, and you can check it out. But some reflection questions to reflect on, this new moon in Aries conjunct Chiron is like, who am I? Who is my real self versus what kind of false self did I maybe have to develop in order to get along in my relationships? Where am I still not speaking up for myself, expressing myself, what needs to be said? Do I feel a healthy relationship with my own body, my own instincts, my own sexuality even? Because this is all related to your will to be who you are in the world. It's this yang energy to express yourself, to explore, to take initiative. So if you're suppressing this will, it manifests as suppressed anger, which usually shows up as frustration, depression even. So just asking yourself, what's my relationship to my willpower, my spontaneity, my instincts? And then with Chiron, it's about how can we use our healing lessons that came up, around this new moon, which was March 31st or April 1st, depending on where you're in the world, where you were living in the world, and basically asking yourself, what core wound got triggered? What kind of healing lessons do I have to learn about that core wound? And how can I use the healing lessons that came up over the next week as a platform for our next adventure, my next chapter, your next story that you want to write, So, and we're going to go through how it shows up in each of the signs at the beginning of the second hour. So you can listen to that if you want to know how it specifically relates to you as well.
Yeah. So again, if you're already a member, you have access to the second hour. If not, and you will have to gain access to the second hour of all podcasts and also to support our work, then please sign up to our membership at my website, veilofreality.com. And with that being said, we'll see you all in the second hour. Thank you.